Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our International Women's Day event, which is our Women in STEM Science series. And I'd first like to start by doing Welcome to Country. I'd like to acknowledge the Darug people of the Darug Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways in Westmead, where we are physically today. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of all lands from which all meeting participants are joining today, as well as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would like to welcome our special guest today, the Honourable Bronnie Taylor, MLC, Minister for Women. Thanks very much for joining us physically. And I believe virtually, we'd like to thank the Honourable Dr. Jeff Lee, MLC member for Parramatta, who's joining us online today. I'd like to now welcome Minister Taylor to officially launch our International Women's Week STEM series. I'll head over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And can I just say what an absolute delight it is to be back here at CMRI. I came here, I think about 6 years ago. We were working out to represent a minister at the time when I was pretty new to Parliament. And I was completely in awe of what happens here. I guess it might help being a cancer nurse in my previous life, but it is just terrific to be back here and to see the work that happens, feel the energy and know the difference that places like this make. And that's why it's so important on International Women's Day to be having an event like this in terms of promoting women in STEM. And one thing I wanted to just talk about really quickly was, you know, we're all so lucky, those of us that are here gathering physically today. It is just so lovely to see faces and to see people and to be able to have that connection. And I think as a state, we did so phenomenally well in terms of our COVID response. And I just wanted to have a really big shout out to the incredible women that head up New South Wales Health. We've got Dr. Kerry Chant, we've got Elizabeth Koff, who's recently just left, our secretary, an incredible woman who started her career in dietetics. And also now Susan Pearce, who led our immunisation strategy, who was the Chief Nursing Officer. It's pretty amazing. And also Service New South Wales, where we got all those text messages if we were close contacts, telling us how to isolate, what to do, reassuring us. That department run by Emma Hogan, also another incredible woman. So I just wanted to say to everyone too, please remember, as women in STEM, women who work here, women who are involved with this, please tell your stories. Please make sure that you say that so that younger women can see what you've done, to be inspired by you, but most of all, to know that it's possible and know that the incredible rewards that come from a career in STEM, the life-changing rewards that come, it's so important. So a massive thank you to all of you for running today, to CMRI, one of my most favourite places. I can't wait to see your recent research come out of what I've done. I just can't tell you how much it means to me and to everybody out there for the incredible sacrifices you make to do the incredible work that you and your team do, Roger. It's truly amazing. So thanks for having me back. Happy International Women's Day and keep up the incredible work. Thanks.
Minister, not just for coming today, but for the support that your government has given us in holding this event. We're really grateful and thanks for coming along, especially in such crazy weather that we're having in Sydney. Really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure.
We're going to let the Minister get on with her busy day. So for everyone who's watching virtually, we're just going to take a minute to let the Minister get ahead of her day, and then we're going to start our interview with Dr. Kate Mullany in a minute. So please bear with us for one moment. All right, welcome Dr. Kate Mullany, who is a PhD student in the Gene Therapy Research Unit here at Children's Medical Research Institute and also works as a paediatrician at the Children's Hospital at Westmead. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Monique. Lovely to be here.
For those of us who might be joining in today, who didn't see our seminar yesterday, the idea of this Women in STEM series is to really explore the journeys to a scientific career. It's not just about saying, as soon as you get your HSC result, that you move straight to university and straight into research. We're speaking to three women with very different paths And Kate has quite a unique story to tell, which is why we've invited her here today. So can you tell me when you first realised you had a passion for science and what age that was and what it was that spurred you on at that time?
Yeah, I think it probably all started with books when I was, I know, in primary school and in early high school. And my grandfather really beautifully gifted us a subscription to a magazine called National Geographic, which I think many of us will probably remember and have probably seen and been touched by so many photos that have come into our homes from across the world. And some of the magazines that I remember reading had just these amazing stories about people doing amazing things, whether it was studying birds in the Amazon or trying to discover new vaccines or new technologies to help people. And I think the stories that came to me through those magazines really, I guess, sparked my interest in trying to figure out how things work and how important science was. And I think that's probably where it started. And then I also remember my mum had all these really cool textbooks from her science degree, looking at embryology and human anatomy and physiology. And I think the natural progression of those two, I guess, interests was then to study medicine. And I think when I realized that you could combine science and the study of humans and how they work and what makes them sick and how you make them better, I thought medicine was a pretty natural fit. So that's how it all started.
So was it an easy journey for you through high school? Were you very focused on, I really want to do medicine when I leave?
I think it was definitely something that I thought I needed to perhaps work towards, but mum and dad were always pretty good at encouraging us just to do the very best so that then you had as many options as possible. And I think I wavered and had a look at a few other different careers. Like I was a bit interested in maybe anthropology, but I always came back to medicine. And then when I did get into medicine after doing my science degree in biology, I just kept coming back to kids and wanting to help them. Yeah.
And so when you got to university, it was very clear to you then that you'd made the right choice?
Yeah, I think so. I remember doing a first year anatomy subject and I had one friend who I did school with and we were both like, yeah, we're going to get into medicine, got to study really hard, we'll take our time through science, learn a bit about the world, but the goal at the end of my science degree was to try and get into medicine, I think. And in our first week anatomy class, I think he almost vomited. And I was like, don't let me out, I want to stay. This is so exciting. And so he quit and went and did statistics. And I kept going. So I think, I was just really lucky that it was something that I thought I would like, and then I did like it. But also, great for him that he was able to say, actually, I need a different dream.
So that's the first test that you need to pass. You can be a medical doctor.
I think, I think, there's lots of different types of medicine, and I think some people are definitely more comfortable with some of the weird and wonderful things that the human body can do. And others that are less comfortable can certainly find a medical career that I guess is more fitted to what they like as well.
So when you were finishing off studying medicine, what was it that drew you towards wanting to do pediatric medicine?
Yeah, studying as a student, we're really lucky in that we get to do a whole lot of different specialties. So we do pediatrics and we also do maternal and women's health. And we go through the hospitals and, there's orthopedics, which is, the study of bones and, all the various different medical specialties. If there's an organ in our body, there's a medical specialty to cover it. So I was really lucky that we got to experience a lot of those different things. But every time that, I really enjoyed, women's health, and then I really enjoyed general practice, and I also really enjoyed internal medicine, but I just kept coming back to pediatrics because I think there was something pretty special about getting to look after a family. If there's a child, there's usually a carer, whether it's a mum and dad or two mums or two dads, however that is, you're always looking after that family unit. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to look after the child, but then also take care of the mum and dad and make sure that everyone was on that health journey together. So that's why, I kept coming back to pediatrics.
That's really interesting that you see it from obviously like a great passion within you that you have for that family experience. I would imagine that a lot of people in considering a medical career would be very intimidated by that sort of setting and how personal, I suppose it must be, on a day-to-day experience. How did you get over that boundary when you first started working in hospitals of dealing with the trauma that you had to see each day in children?
Yeah, it's really tough on these families that we get to look after, which I think is an enormous privilege as a medical practitioner to be able to, be there for those families. And for some of them, it's like the worst days of their lives when they come into the hospital. But I guess that's what our training is for. And I think, if you genuinely care about the people that you're looking after, it doesn't become something that's too hard because you really want to do the best to help them. And it's often just about engaging them in conversations that help you understand what they're scared about, what their fears and how you can help their child. So it's sometimes a hard job, but it's always rewarding.
And at what point can you talk me through when you first started working in a hospital, what the pathway was to metabolic disorders and how you found that passion there?
Yeah, so I started training at Westmead Children's Hospital in, I think it's 2015, so a little while ago now. And as a junior pediatric trainee, again, it's a little bit like medical school where you go around and you get to have a bit of a taste for all the various different pediatric specialties. And I was really lucky to be placed in the pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology service here at Westmead Children's Hospital, which is one of the national transplant centres for pediatrics in Australia. I think there's only really 3 main centres: Brisbane, here in Sydney, and in Melbourne. And the Sydney centre here gets kids from Perth and from South Australia and all over New South Wales. And so as part of that experience, I was able to meet lots of different families from all over Australia with kids that needed new livers. And some of those children needed livers because their livers stopped working because they went into liver failure. But other children needed new livers because they had metabolic disorders where, unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have a good enough cure for that particular disease. And most of these diseases are genetic diseases. So for whatever reason, whether it's they inherit a copy of a gene that doesn't work from their mum and dad, and then that means that they've got a particular metabolic disorder where perhaps they can't metabolize a certain substance in their food, or it can make them really, really sick. But one of the treatments, even though it's not a cure, it's sort of a big band-aid that we can give these kids, is a liver transplant. And getting to be part of the team that gave these kids a liver transplant was such a life-changing experience for me and also for these families that I knew I just wanted to be part of that medical specialty so that I could give these kids, another chance at life.
You talked before about your friend who was overwhelmed, the first time he had to do surgery or see something that made him feel sick. And you said, yeah, you knew that you were on the right path. I would imagine it's a huge jump to watching a very small child having a major operation like a transplant. What was it like the first time? Were you actually physically in the room watching your first transplant?
It's incredible. There's so many people that are involved to make a transplant go right, from the nurse on the ward to the man that collects the family and pushes the bed and the child to theatre so that they can then go and have it. And then there's the surgeons and the operating theatre nurses, and there's so many people part of that team. But and even if you're just a fly on the wall, you still feel like you're part of something pretty big. But the most amazing moment, I think, is when the transplant organ, so someone has really generously donated that organ so that when they no longer need it, someone gets a second chance at life. When that organ gets put into the recipient and the surgeons connect all the blood vessels up, and you see that organ then pink up. So it's, cold, wet, it's been transported from somewhere in Australia. And when it just turns pink from the blood flow, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. It's magic. So that's pretty incredible. And I mean, it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think, at the end of the day, it's a lot of people working together to make someone's life a lot better. And because there's that happening underneath it all, you know, I think, yeah, you can definitely take a step back and it can feel pretty overwhelming, but there's always a job to be done. So, you know, focusing on that makes it much more, I think, manageable.
And how do you personally stay calm in those situations? Because having spoken to families myself who've gone through that, it's a pretty tight turnaround when the call comes in, we've got a liver that this child can have access to. It's then a new emergency situation for
Yeah.
this family. The family have been waiting for the call, but then all of a sudden it's a pretty rapid
It is.
situation.
It can be really rapid. And in some ways, because it's, I mean, everyone is very individualistic and very unique. And, you know, we treat each family, you know, based on their various needs. But I guess at the end of the day, it's still a procedure. It's a medical procedure, and we have lists and checklists, and in some ways it's very protocolized, like a lot of the things we do in science, where, you know, to do one thing, you do a certain set of steps to then get to the outcome. And sometimes you need to be responsive and deviate from those based on different things that are happening during that particular surgery. But because it's, in some ways, it's very routine for us, if that makes sense, not without minimizing, you know, the enormity of the procedure, but because it's something that we've done so many times now. And the surgeons that do the procedures, they're, you know, absolute experts at what they do. And from the medical side of things, when we're, you know, protocolizing all of the various medications and making sure all the things are in order for the transplant to go as well as possible, I guess because we've done it so many times, and with the training that we've done, it's, in some ways, it's quite easy to be calm, even though, you know, you want it to go very well and you're a bit nervous about it always. But because it's something that we do, I guess, all the time, it's definitely easier, I think, to manage your emotions about it. Yeah.
So you're one of a handful of people who work at Children's Medical Research Institute who have a clinical background, and there seems to be this common thread amongst those researchers, which was a frustration of speaking to families and not being able to give them the answers that they wanted. So can you talk about the first time you started to think about moving from clinical work to research?
Yeah, I think with the advance of our ability to diagnose conditions these days, whether it's, you know, a particular type of infection like the coronavirus, you know, the scientific community got together, figured that out. In pediatric medicine, a lot of the conditions that I saw within the hepatology field were genetic-based conditions. And whilst these days we can diagnose the conditions because we have diagnostic technologies that are now powerful enough to look at the DNA of patients and see perhaps where the various mutations or mistakes are that then would mean they've got a particular condition. We know what is making them sick, but sometimes we can treat it and sometimes we can't. And that's no one's fault. It's just, unfortunately, I guess, a measure that where medicine is at the moment hasn't quite caught up to our ability to diagnose things. And so a part of that as a pediatric doctor is that a lot of the time when you have a family who have a kid who's sick and we're trying to figure out why, we can tell them why they're unwell, but we're sometimes not able to offer them a cure or a treatment or a thing to help their child feel better in a way that I think is good enough. And so that's part of why I wanted to come into research, is because telling families why their child is sick is great because everyone wants to know what's wrong. But then their next question always is, well, what can we do? And sometimes we can say, well, we can put them on a special diet, but they will still get sick if they get a cold, or we can, you know, give you a couple of medications, but these medications have really bad side effects and we're going to have to manage them. Or we can give your child a new liver and it will mean that their metabolic condition is not as bad, but they might still get rejection of the organ, or they might get really sick from the medications that they need. So we just don't have a good enough, I think, therapy option for a lot of families. And that's why I wanted to make the transition here to CMRI, which is involved in looking after and trying to find all sorts of new cures for sick kids, especially children with genetic diseases, because I just wanted to give families more options.
Was it a slow build of frustration, or do you remember sort of coming home one night after a very long shift and after a particular patient you met and you thought, that's it, like I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to
I think it was more of a slow burn, because, you know, you hear, I mean, and it's not just in the hepatology field either, it's in so many different fields of medicine. There's children with genetic diseases, and you just sort of think, gosh, there just has to be a better way. And I think in hearing sort of one of my supervisors, Dr. Susan Su, she did a PhD here with one of my other supervisors, Professor Ian Alexander, and sort of hearing the work that she did and the experience and how, you know, it sort of just helped complement her clinical life and gave, you know, the option of being able to help a whole other set of families with your, you know, research and skills as a medical researcher. It was pretty inspiring, and it, I think, just helped cement a lot of the feelings and frustrations that had been slowly building over your time as a clinician.
So many people obviously know Professor Ian Alexander as the head of gene therapy research unit. What was it like seeing Ian in, and I presume you worked with Ian in a clinical setting, and then was it chatting to him, and did he give you any advice about moving across to research? Oh,
he is one of the most passionate people I know about medical research. He just, yeah, he lives and breathes it. I think, you know, he really appreciates the skills that clinicians can bring to the medical research sort of community. And so I've always felt, yeah, exceptionally supported from, you know, some of the early chats and going forward. Yeah, so it's been, I think, pretty lovely and pretty unique in a medical research setting to be able to have both the support of the medical scientists and then also clinicians like Prof Alexander too.
So what was it like? I know you, not long after you started at CMRI, I was asking you how the transition was, and you were saying it can be a bit frustrating because it feels like starting from scratch. How are you feeling now?
Yeah, it was so interesting. Where I was in the hospital, I have essentially finished all of my medical training, and you know, I had beautiful registrars that would, you know, type for me and do all the jobs, and I could ask them to, could I get an ultrasound? I'm like, oh, I've already done that, you know, like they're just wonderful. And, and then coming to be a PhD student, I think I didn't even quite know what a pipette really was. So it was really interesting and really humbling starting off anew. And I can recommend it to anyone because it's, you know, I think starting something new and just feeling all of those feelings of, am I going to be able to do this? How am I going to do this? You know, all of those things that have, you know, are natural consequences when you start something very new and you're right back at the bottom of the totem pole. It's, yeah, I think it's very good for you because it teaches you to be humble, and it teaches you to, you know, advocate for yourself and ask questions. And it then also allows you to then help other people if they're, you know, back in that position as well. So I think it's, yeah, it was definitely a big challenge starting something completely different. When I figured out, I was pretty good at being a doctor. I figured that out. And now I think I'm like an average scientist, but I'm getting better. Yeah, no, it's nice now. I think that in the lab, you know, I can plan, you know, big experiments and over long periods of time, and you can have things going, you know, multiple things going at once. So it's definitely
Yesterday, we were speaking to Renee, who heads up our stem cell group, about just having enthusiasm and passion and determination. And she was sort of saying that's what gets her through when she's having a challenging day. Did you come in here with this sort of optimism of, you know, I'm going to get the answers and I'm going to change the world? How did you get through those barriers of having a little bit more frustration in the lab?
Undoubtedly. Yeah, it was definitely, I think in the early days, it was, again, just remembering why I wanted to do this in the first place. So I'm like, sometimes when things are, it's okay, I'm doing it for the kids, it's all right. The end goal is always, I think if you can keep that in mind, it helps the baby steps in between. And definitely having, the support and passion of lots of other really excited scientists around you is pretty infectious and helps you keep going too.
What have you found to have been your sort of love and hate about the switch to the lab?
Oh, I think not having, some people will know what this is, some people won't. It's called a pager. And if you're a medical person, you know that pagers are just awful and you want to throw them against the wall because they never stop beeping. But they're a way for people to contact you. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the hospital, your time is never your own, but that's okay. It's, that's what you're there to do. But sometimes it means you don't eat, you don't wee, you don't finish a thought, you don't finish a sentence. But, that's okay. And it's not like that all the time, but it's sometimes like that. But in the lab, your time is really your own and you get to sit and think and you can finish a thought. And you can even just spend, several hours thinking about one problem, which is a real luxury, I think, and definitely is something that, and I think in many ways is why it is really important to protect, that scientific research time, to have that, time to be able to think about things. So that is something that has been really nice in terms of switching from full-time clinical work to full-time research. I do really miss the patients, which I think is something that has been definitely something that has affirmed my right choice, in that a clinician is something that I really like doing. So that bit has been a little bit hard, but I still work in the hospital on weekends and occasionally to remember how to be a doctor, and also to, get, those lovely interactions which help you keep going in the research world as well.
I was going to ask that. How often are you still working in the hospital, and how have you found that clinical background has helped you as a researcher? Yeah,
I think they're very complementary in many ways, because I think the sort of skills and things that make a scientific experiment really sound and, make good science also do the same in medicine, because at the root of it, you're trying to solve a problem. Someone has come to you in, the medical world, I've got a sore toe, or I have, I have this rash, or, whatever it is. And so it's about asking a series of questions and then testing them in order to, get to the right conclusion. I think the difference in science sometimes is that you're working on a problem that no one knows the answer to. Whereas often in medicine, most of the time someone's seen it before and you just have to figure out what particular one it is. So I think they're really, really quite complementary in terms of a skill set. Sometimes you have to think a bit faster and quicker in the hospital. But I think because in, the research world, we're trying to find answers to questions that, don't yet have a good answer. It's nice to have the luxury of time and, have that sort of, I guess, whole infrastructure here that we have at CMI to help you do that.
And you just said that then, it sounded quite powerful when you said you're trying to find answers that no one has ever been able to find answers to. And I've heard people in this building say that before, but more, they've just had a publication and they've just discovered something or found something out that no one had ever found out before. And when you hear someone say it in that way, it seems so exciting and you think it's, such an incredible celebration. But the way you just said it then, it sounds so intimidating to be thinking about your workday is trying to solve a problem that no one else in history of science has ever been able to solve before. Do you have moments where you feel like it's that big?
Sometimes, definitely. But there's a lovely senior scientist in our lab, Grant Logan, and I think when I first started, we were chatting about just the enormity of starting off on such a project as a PhD, and he just made the comment that people don't finish a marathon in 5 minutes. It's 1 foot after the other. And that's definitely something that I've tried to remember most days, because you know, if you think about the whole project that you're trying to, or the whole question that you're trying to answer, you know, in one moment it does seem pretty big, but like with most problems, it's just you figure out one thing, then you figure out the next thing, and it's, yeah, just I guess a slow, steady, determined, sort of deliberate process that you're trying to work on, and that makes it okay. You just try and do a couple of things each day to get you, you know, forward.
What would you say to anyone who's here in this room or people watching about switching careers? Because while to a lot of people it might seem like a natural transition, it is essentially swapping careers. What would you say to people about the reasons to do it, but also maybe the hurdles that they'll have to face?
Yeah, it's definitely not something to undertake lightly. I think if you can really think about the reasons behind what you're trying to do with your sort of career and life, you know, if you have a greater purpose behind it, if it's trying to help people, you know, if you think that moving into a different sort of space will help to, you know, complement that or fulfill that particular purpose, then that's probably a good starting point. Have a chat with lots of people that have also done it. So if you have a mentor or someone in that particular field, I think that can be really helpful to, you know, see if it's something that you're going to like and enjoy. And also, if you can find someone who has the job that you want and talk to them and see how they got there, then that can also, I guess, help inform that as well. Because often some people who have pretty cool jobs will have done lots of other various things that helps them get those, you know, requisite skills and, you know, have the various life experiences that help them make them really good at that job. So I think if that's something that then means that you change your career and do certain various different things in order to help you get there, then that's, I think, what I would do or what my advice would be to someone who's thinking about changing careers. And in terms of, I guess, how I think personally this has been, I definitely wouldn't change it. It's been, really invaluable experience.
For a lot of people, just the idea of change is a bit scary. So how did you overcome that? What advice would you give to people about just actually making the first step?
I think you just have to make it. You can talk about it a lot and you can think about it a lot, but I think once you've decided it's something that you want to do, you just have to start. And a lot of big, scary problems in the world, whether it's climate change or fighting genetic disease or, you know, women's equality, they all just started with someone taking one step. I think the first ever International Women's Day was like a bunch of angry, awesome ladies in New York in the early 1900s, and they just wanted fair pay and to be able to vote. And now you and I are here talking about like our life experiences because, you know, hundreds of people before us have paved the way for that. So I think you just have to start, no matter what it is.
What's been your experience of working in the hospital and as a researcher as a woman, and what have you seen are the advantages or disadvantages for women working in this particular field?
Yeah, I think I sort of came into science in high school feeling like women were definitely underrepresented. I was like the only girl in my physics class, but the teacher was this really cool girl. And so I think what has been amazing has been all of the mentors that have been female. I mean, I've had wonderful mentors that are males as well, but I think it's been really lovely to have just really amazing, inspirational female mentors in science that have definitely helped me keep going. And just thinking back, like in undergraduate, there was this amazing researcher called Professor Sharon Robinson, who is leading the Australian climate research and is doing wonderful things for climate research in Australia. And I was lucky enough to work with her, and she just encouraged me to do whatever I wanted. You know, even if I didn't want to end up doing, you know, climate science research, she just, you know, encouraged me. And similarly in the hospital, there's been just amazing, you know, female role models. And I mean, I think in pediatrics, it's very easy to find amazing female role models because the pediatric field is definitely more women-based than in terms of workforce. But no matter I think where you are, find amazing women who will help inspire you, because at the end of the day, often, and it's just a product of our society, and I think things are slowly getting more equal, that women will, if they're bearing children, they will often take on care roles in the family, and in some fields, or certain fields in the STEM area, women traditionally have been underrepresented. So if it's something that I think as a high school student or as a young university student, if you want to go into a field where you're feeling perhaps maybe it's not as easy as a woman, find a woman in it and then go have a chat with them, because they will no doubt tell you how to get to where you want to go. And yeah, I think even though at times it's been a challenging career, I think there's always been women that have gone before me that have helped encourage me, to be able to get to where I want to go. So I think, there will be challenges no matter what you do, not just because you're a woman, because, if you want to do something good, it's always going to be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to, if you've got somewhere that you want to be in terms of, STEM careers, yeah, just do it. You'll be able to do it.
So I take from what you just said that finding a mentor is really important, you think, for young women. What about, again, we spoke yesterday with Anae about advocating for yourself. Anae said, she's, if anyone who knows her, she's not shy, she's not backwards at all about coming forwards, but even she realized at one point in her career that she was probably just accepting any opportunity that was given to her, and so she really realized that she had to really advocate for herself and put her hand up and say, why shouldn't I be at the best university studying under the greatest professor? So is that something you've seen, that women perhaps are not very good at advocating for themselves and dreaming higher? Like, it doesn't sound like you had that frustration in your family, but can you see that,
Oh, undoubtedly.
do you really want to take on 2 jobs at the same time? Do you really want to be a clinician and a researcher?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think it's, it can be tricky, I think, depending on the opportunities that you've been given in life. And I'm very aware that because of the value that my parents placed on education, and circumstances in growing up in Australia, that I've had so many more opportunities than so many other people. But I think that's the duty that we have as women in positions where we can help influence that and encourage others to help, young girls see that they can, absolutely be whatever they want to be. And I think, again, finding a mentor is really important. Advocating for yourself is, you just have to. No one is going to achieve it other than yourself. So that's really, really important.
Just before we hand over to Q&A, why would you tell young women that they should explore a career in research? Perhaps they're like you, they're, have always loved the idea of science, but why particularly research? Why would you tell them to enter that field?
I think, well, maybe the International Women's Day sort of theme for this year is equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. And I think that there are so many interesting challenges and problems in this world. And we know that if you empower women and educate them, that the whole living standards of society improve. And the way that then you can improve upon that is getting women into science, getting them into education, because then they'll help elevate all of the children of the future. And science is pretty powerful. It helps find problems and then find solutions. And in helping to answer these really big questions and find solutions for them, I think, women in particular, because I think women and men are able to perhaps, make a big difference in everything in terms of science and STEM careers. But I think we know if women in particular are able to see things differently, look at things differently, and help make a really big difference, I think for society, it's going to, make our future much brighter. So I think for young girls in school and university, a STEM career definitely gives you the opportunity to help change the future. And so I really encourage you to think seriously about it and go and have a chat with people that have trod the path before you.
Thanks, Kate. That's fantastic answers. Hopefully some people got some questions they'd like to ask here or online. If you'd like to ask any questions online, you can ask those as well. But anyone in the room like to ask Kate a question? Don't be shy.
Okay, it's excellent. Thank you for that. It's really inspiring. Being in the clinician situation, obviously, I'm not sure where you are in your PhD studies. Do you see going back into the clinical environment, the opportunity to be able to do research in that space easily?
I'll just repeat the question
sorry.
just so that everyone online heard it. So it's about the connection between your work here and at the hospital and how, I suppose, optimistic you are about that.
It's a really great question, because I think as clinicians, we're primed to put our patients first. And so in then being able to have that quiet time that you need to, be effective with any, research project, it can be quite challenging. And I think part of the solution to that, which I'm hoping I'll be able to do in the future, is being able to work in a department that values research. Because if they value research, then they're more able to help you work to be able to juggle that clinical time and help give you protected research time. And I think part of that is also being a good advocate and being able to say no to things, because, at the end of the day, there's lots of doctors and the work for the patients will get done. But no one will do your research project except for yourself. So that's what I'm hoping to be able to do in the future.
There's an online question that's related to that. How did you deal with transitioning to research and losing all of those resources from being able to, how did you manage that transition?
So the question was linking back to what Kate was talking about, having a team that she worked with at the hospital, and now, well, she works as part of a team. Her research is her research. How did you cope with that change?
Oh, it was a bit sad to lose all my registrars. No. It's kind of nice, because in some ways it means that the work that you do is your own. You're responsible for it. It's very motivating. If you don't do it, no one will do it. So it was okay. It was fine. And we're exceptionally well resourced here at CMRI due to the generous donation of so many people through the various fundraising campaigns like Genes for Genes. We are really, really lucky because we have lots of people in Australia that also value our research and help give us lots of resources to be able to do a really good job here. So it's been okay.
What does success look like in relation to your research? What's the big question that you're trying to answer?
So thanks for that question. The question was, what does success look like in terms of my PhD project? And the project that I'm working on is looking at creating a gene therapy. For people that aren't familiar with gene therapy, it's where we use certain particles like viruses or certain lipids to deliver a little bit of a genetic material to a cell so that we can make the cell function work again. And the project that I'm working on is for a disease called maple syrup urine disease, which is a genetic metabolic liver disease. And what I'm hopefully trying to do is create a gene therapy for this particular disease. So the short-term success is seeing if the therapies that I'm creating work in my disease models. And then the long-term success of this project would be measured, hopefully, in having a treatment that gets to the clinic. So being able to treat the patients that I previously looked after.
I was just about to ask a follow-up question. So you have worked with families who have this condition?
Yeah, yep. Some of them have been my transplant patients. Yeah, we've actually had some of these families have generous donations of livers so that we're able to do research on this condition directly.
I know sometimes I've spoken to scientists who've had incredible publications, and obviously we do basic research at CMRI. And sometimes scientists say to me, I try not to think too far ahead. In fact, I don't really want to be too distracted by the patient and what could be the end of this long journey. For you, you're coming at it from the complete opposite perspective. Is that difficult when you've actually met people and you have a face to everything that's going on in the lab? Is that really difficult?
I think it could be overwhelming, but for me, I find it exceptionally motivating because, you know, I have a real personal connection with who I'm trying to help. But I'm also conscious that, you know, there's that family that I've worked with, but that's replicated throughout the world. You know, it's definitely, hopefully, will have, you know, much broader impact than just the families that I've been lucky enough to work with.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Laurel's got one online.
Just one from online. How do you manage the work-life balance as a clinician and a PhD student?
Yeah, that's always the International Women's Day question. We had the same one yesterday. How do you manage the work-life balance?
Thanks for that question. I think as a PhD student, I must say it's much easier to have a better work-life balance than as a pediatric gastroenterology fellow. No pager and no on call unless I choose to do it occasionally on the weekends. You know, I think work-life balance is something that throughout our lives, you just have to be conscious of trying to maintain. And there's going to be times where, you know, your work-life balance will go out the window because there's just something that has to be done, and that's okay. But I think you just have to be conscious that then, you know, once that particular project or that particular on-call week or whatever it is that you needed to really put more effort into from a career point of view, once that period has settled down, just being conscious to then crawl back a bit of the life balance. And I think, you know, the big things for me are to make sure I keep exercising and eating well, and then everything else tends to fall in place around that. So if you can keep those things going, I think that will, goes a long way.
The big question we heard yesterday was, do you read publications in bed at night, is what Anae told us. So she wasn't sure she had a great work-life balance, but her reading in bed was scientific publications.
No, I do not read scientific publications. That I think that, that's too far for me. But, you know, everyone else will have a different way that they maintain their work-life balance. And I think that's important. You know, the way that someone else does it is not going to be right for you. You just need to be sure that, you know, it's what's going to help you.
Jane, you had a question.
Yes, Kate, I'm interested, once you've finished your PhD, what does life look like after that? Will you go back to being a clinician, or do you think you'll continue with research of some description? I
would really like to be able to parallel both of those particular, you know, parts of my career. Ideally, there are some centres in the UK where they have some liver transplant programs and also some gene therapy programs in pediatrics and adult hepatology. So perhaps an overseas fellowship might be next, depending on how the world is and how crazy it gets. But yeah, just open to opportunities, I think. And I mean, there was also going to be one of the vector manufacturing facilities. So, you know, there's lots of investment, I think, in the infrastructure and ability to hopefully, you know, conduct clinical trials here at the Westmead Research Hub. So if opportunities arise there, it would be a really nice fit, I think, to be able to keep the research in clinical medicine going.
Do you ever see it intimidating when you see Professor Ian Alexander, you know, jumping between the two buildings, going back and forth? When you talk about the future vision and you see that, are you prepared for that level of busy that Ian always seems to have in his life?
I'd like to hope that I'll be able to, but Ian has a really really supportive team around him that helps him be able to do that. So I think he's very good at collecting really good people around him that makes that a possibility. Yeah.
Any more final questions before we wrap up? More online? No, okay. And I guess just one more question, because you are such an empathetic person who's connected to your patients. Do you actually keep in contact with them and give them updates about what you're doing? And you know, I know here at CMRI, when we do Genes for Genes, we're quite connected to the families, and you seem like someone who does stay in touch with them. And how do you maintain that? Yeah, not getting too deeply involved in their lives.
I mean, part of our medical training is that, you know, patient-doctor confidentiality. And so I guess I'm very mindful of the fact that, you know, there's a hospital sort of world, and then there's the rest of the world. And so I'm very careful to, you know, never cross any of those boundaries. But part of still continuing some clinical work while I'm doing my PhD is that I still get to see some of the families at the hospital and take care of the kids if they need to come in, if they're sick. And it's always lovely to be able to, you know, even though they're in hospital, it's not nice that they're in hospital and need to be in hospital, but it's lovely to hear how the families have been going. And, you know, they're always really interested to be like, oh, we haven't seen you. Where have you been? It's like, oh, I've been in the research world. And they get very excited to know that, you know, people that have looked after their kids are also trying to find new treatments and therapies for them as well.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time today, for sharing so much of your journey with us. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.